A shivering kitten found itself cornered by coyotes, its tiny heart racing as danger closed in from all sides. In a wild world where every moment could mean survival or demise, this little creature faced its greatest challenge yet. But just when all hope seemed lost, a lone eagle descended from the heavens, ready to change the course of this harrowing tale. Join us as we witness a story of courage, unlikely friendships, and the fight for life in the face of the wild. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the landscape in shades of amber and gold, casting long, dancing shadows across the sprawling meadow. In a vast wilderness surrounded by towering pine trees that seemed to touch the clouds and jagged rocky cliffs that rose like ancient sentinels, a tiny kitten with soft, silvery gray fur and bright emerald eyes explored its world with unbridled curiosity and wonder. This little creature, barely a few months old, had ventured far from the safety and comfort of its mother's cozy den. With each step, the kitten's delicate paws barely made a sound as they pressed against the soft earth and wild grass. Every rustling leaf was an adventure waiting to unfold, every dancing shadow a mystery begging to be solved, and every new scent in the air a promise of discovery. The kitten pounced on colorful butterflies with reckless abandon, chasing them through the meadow as they fluttered just out of reach. It chased the whispers of the wind as it moved through the tall grass, rolling playfully in patches of clover and wildflowers. The kitten felt invincible, untouchable, as if the entire world existed solely for its entertainment and amusement. There was no fear in its heart, only the pure joy of exploration and the thrill of freedom. But the wild has a way of humbling the innocent. As the kitten wandered deeper and deeper into the unknown, the landscape began to shift in subtle but unmistakable ways. The cheerful chirping of birds that had filled the air moments before faded into an eerie, unsettling silence. The warm, comforting sunlight dimmed noticeably as dark clouds began to gather overhead, casting increasingly long and ominous shadows across the ground. The temperature dropped, and a chill ran through the air. The kitten's playful energy started to wane, replaced gradually by a creeping sense of unease that it couldn't quite understand. Its ears perked up, alert and listening intently to every sound, or lack thereof. The meadow, once so full of life and wonder, now felt foreign and dangerous. Then, carried on the cold wind like a harbinger of doom, came a sound that made the kitten's fur stand on end. A low, guttural growl echoing from somewhere in the encroaching darkness. It was a sound unlike anything the kitten had ever heard before. Primal and menacing, filled with hunger and intent. The growl seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, reverberating through the kitten's small body and sending shivers down its spine. The kitten's bright, emerald eyes widened in shock and confusion as it froze in place. Its heart began to race, pounding against its tiny ribcage like a frantic drum. The kitten realized, for the first time in its young life, that it was no longer alone in this vast wilderness. More than that, it was no longer safe. The world it had seen as a playground of endless possibilities had suddenly transformed into something far more sinister and threatening. The shadows seemed to move with purpose now, and the kitten could make out shapes. Dark silhouettes moving through the tall grass with deliberate, calculated movements. These were not friendly creatures. These were hunters, and the kitten had just become their prey. But little did the kitten know, danger was only the beginning of its adventure. The shadows that had seemed so distant moments before began to take on a more defined and terrifying form. As the kitten's eyes adjusted to the dimming light, it could make out the unmistakable silhouettes of coyotes. Lean, muscular predators with sharp ears pointed toward the sky, and eyes that gleamed with an unsettling intelligence that spoke of cunning and ancient instinct. There were at least 5 of them, moving with a synchronized grace and precision that spoke of countless hunts and coordinated attacks executed with brutal efficiency. Their sleek bodies, covered in tan and gray fur with hints of russet brown, blended seamlessly with the landscape, making them appear and disappear like ghosts in the fading daylight. Each coyote was easily 10 times the size of the tiny kitten, with powerful legs built for speed and endurance that allowed them to traverse vast distances without tiring, and jaws capable of delivering a devastating bite that could crush bone with ease. The lead coyote, larger and more scarred than the others, stepped forward with a confidence that came from years of dominance in this wild realm. Its muscular frame bore the marks of countless battles, notches in its ears, scars across its muzzle, and a missing patch of fur on its shoulder that told stories of survival and victory. This was an alpha, a leader who had earned its position through strength, cunning, and an unwavering will to survive. Its eyes locked onto the kitten with an intensity that made the small creature's blood run cold. The coyote's gaze was calculating, assessing, measuring the prey before it with the precision of a seasoned hunter who had learned to read every weakness and vulnerability in its quarry. The kitten could feel the weight of that stare pressing down upon it like a physical force. The coyote's nose twitched repeatedly, catching the scent of fear that now emanated from the kitten in waves. A sweet, intoxicating aroma that triggered something primal and ancient within the predator's brain. The coyote's pupils dilated, and its breathing became shallow and rapid, a sign that the hunt was activating every fiber of its being. A low, rumbling growl emanated from deep within the lead coyote's chest, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very earth beneath the kitten's feet. It was a warning to any other predators in the area that this prey belonged to this pack, and a promise to the kitten that its fate was sealed. The growl was layered with menace, hunger, and an ancient promise of the circle of life in all its brutal reality. The other coyotes responded immediately to their leader's signal, their ears perking up as they began to circle slowly, methodically, with movements that were almost hypnotic in their precision. They spread out in a coordinated pattern, each one taking a position that cut off potential escape routes. They had done this countless times before, and they moved with the precision of experienced hunters who knew exactly how to corner their prey and prevent any chance of escape. The circle tightened with each passing second. The kitten could see the eyes of each coyote fixed upon it, glowing in the dimming light like amber embers. Their breathing was synchronized, their movements fluid and practiced. This was a dance they had performed many times, and they knew every step. The kitten's entire body trembled uncontrollably as it watched the coyotes close in from all sides. Every instinct screamed at it to run, to flee, to do anything but stand frozen in this moment. The kitten's legs felt weak and unresponsive, as if they belonged to someone else entirely. Its heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst from its small chest. But fear had taken root deep within the kitten's small frame, a paralyzing dread so profound that even breathing became difficult. The kitten's mouth went dry, and its emerald eyes darted frantically from one coyote to another, searching desperately for any gap in their formation, any possible avenue of escape. But there was none. The pack had done its job perfectly. One of the coyotes on the left side of the pack let out a sharp, piercing yelp, a high-pitched sound that cut through the evening air like a knife. It was a signal to the others that the hunt was beginning, a call that activated something ancient and primal within the pack. The sound sent a jolt of pure, undiluted terror through the kitten's body, freezing every muscle and sending its mind into a state of panic. This was no longer a game or an adventure. This was survival, raw and brutal and unforgiving. This was nature in its most honest form, stripped of all pretense and mercy. The kitten understood, with a clarity that came only from the face of imminent death, that it was about to become part of the food chain. The lead coyote's muscles tensed visibly, rippling beneath its fur as it prepared for the final pounce. Its body lowered into a crouch, its haunches rising slightly as it gathered all its power and strength for one explosive burst of speed and violence. Its lips curled back, revealing sharp canines that glinted like daggers in the last rays of sunlight filtering through the clouds. The other coyotes mirrored the movement in perfect synchronization, their bodies coiling like springs, ready to release all their stored energy at once. They were a single organism now, a unified force of nature moving with one purpose and one intent. The air around them seemed to crackle with anticipation and hunger. The kitten could see death approaching, step by inevitable step, drawing closer with each passing heartbeat. There was nothing it could do to stop it. Nowhere to run. No one to call for help. The vast wilderness that had seemed so full of promise and wonder just moments before had become a prison, a killing ground where the laws of nature were absolute and unforgiving. The kitten's small voice let out a plaintive cry, a desperate mew that echoed across the meadow, a final plea to the uncaring universe for mercy or salvation. But the cry was swallowed by the gathering darkness and the heavy breathing of the predators that surrounded it. But the chase was far from over. Now the real fight for survival was about to begin. And in the distance, unnoticed by any of the creatures on the ground below, something was stirring in the sky above. The lead coyote's muscles coiled tighter and tighter, every fiber of its powerful body poised for the killing strike that would end this hunt. The sinews beneath its fur rippled with barely contained energy, and its haunches rose higher as it prepared to launch itself forward with devastating force. The other pack members held their positions with disciplined precision, their eyes fixed unwavering on the trembling kitten, their breathing synchronized like the beating of a single, predatory heart that pulsed with hunger and anticipation. The moment of truth had arrived. The instant where prey became meal, and the circle of life continued its eternal, merciless cycle. The coyotes had done this countless times before, and they moved with the confidence of predators who knew the outcome was already determined. The kitten's fate seemed sealed by the very laws of nature itself. But fate, it seemed, had other plans written in the stars. A sound pierced the evening air with startling clarity, not the cry of the kitten or the growl of the coyotes, but something far more unexpected and powerful. It was the thunderous beat of massive wings, the rush of air displaced by something large and formidable, moving at incredible speed through the sky. The sound was like the crack of a whip, sharp and commanding, cutting through the ambient noise of the meadow and demanding immediate attention. The coyotes' heads snapped upward in unison, their predatory focus momentarily broken by this new and unfamiliar threat that challenged their dominance. Their ears swiveled toward the sound, and their eyes widened as they caught sight of the approaching silhouette against the darkening sky. For the first time since beginning their hunt, the pack felt a flicker of uncertainty. Descending from the darkening sky, like an avenging angel sent from the heavens, came a golden eagle of magnificent proportions. Its wingspan easily 6 feet across, perhaps even more. Its powerful wings beating with a rhythm that spoke of strength and mastery of the air. The great bird's talons were extended like curved daggers of polished steel, each one as long as the kitten's entire body, capable of piercing through flesh and bone with terrifying ease. The eagle was a magnificent creature in every sense of the word, with feathers that caught the last light of day and seemed to glow with an inner fire of burnished gold and deep brown. The plumage around its head and neck was particularly striking, with feathers that stood slightly on end, giving the bird an appearance of nobility and fierce determination. Its eyes were sharp and intelligent, capable of spotting movement from miles away in the clearest detail. And they were fixed with deadly intent upon the coyote pack below. The eagle's body was muscular and compact, built by evolution for one purpose: hunting from above with precision and devastating efficiency. Every feather was perfectly placed, every muscle toned and ready for action. This was a predator in its prime, at the absolute peak of its physical condition, and it moved through the air with a grace and power that seemed almost supernatural. The eagle had been hunting in the high peaks when it caught sight of the gathering predators and the small prey they surrounded. The great bird had been circling above the mountains, searching for rabbits or ground squirrels, when something caught its attention. Perhaps the movement of the coyotes, perhaps the desperate cry of the kitten, or perhaps something else entirely that only the eagle could perceive. Whatever it was that drew the great bird's attention, it had decided to intervene in the drama unfolding below. Whether it was instinct, curiosity, territorial defense, or something else entirely that drove the great bird to intervene, no one could say. But intervene it did, with a ferocity and determination that matched the coyote's own predatory nature and perhaps even exceeded it. The eagle was not hunting for food. It was hunting to protect, to assert dominance, to prove that even on the ground there were forces that could not be ignored. The lead coyote barely had time to react before the eagle was upon it, descending with the speed of a falling stone. The great bird's talons raked across the predator's back with a force that drew blood in thick, dark streams and elicited a yelp of pain and surprise that echoed across the meadow. The impact was so sudden and so violent that the coyote was knocked sideways, its carefully balanced stance disrupted entirely. The coyote spun around with incredible speed, snapping at the air where the bird had been mere seconds before, its jaws closing on nothing but empty space. But the eagle was already climbing higher, banking sharply to the left with a powerful beat of its wings, circling back for another attack. With the precision of a seasoned hunter, the bird moved through the air with such grace and control that it seemed to defy the very laws of physics. The other coyotes scattered in confusion and panic, their carefully orchestrated hunt falling apart in an instant, like a house of cards caught in a sudden wind. The pack had never encountered anything like this before. A predator that attacked from above, that couldn't be circled or cornered using their usual tactics, that operated in 3 dimensions while they were bound to 2. The dynamic had shifted entirely, and the coyotes found themselves suddenly uncertain and disorganized, their confidence shattered. One of the younger coyotes yelped in fear and bolted toward the trees, abandoning the hunt entirely. Another stood its ground, snapping uselessly at the sky, trying desperately to reach the bird but knowing in its heart that it was futile. The pack's unity, so carefully maintained moments before, began to crumble under the pressure of this unexpected assault. The kitten, still frozen in terror on the ground below, watched in amazement and bewilderment as the eagle dove again with breathtaking speed. This time, the great bird targeted a different coyote, one of the younger males who had been circling to the kitten's left. The eagle's talons connected with the predator's shoulder with brutal precision, tearing through fur and flesh with the ease of a hot knife through butter. Blood sprayed across the meadow grass as the coyote yelped and twisted violently, trying desperately to snap at the bird that was raking its back with those terrible talons. But the eagle was already airborne again, climbing higher into the sky where the coyotes couldn't possibly reach, their earthbound nature a terrible handicap against this aerial predator. The bird climbed until it was 100 feet above the ground, then circled lazily, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. The lead coyote, bleeding from multiple wounds on its back and shoulders, let out a series of sharp, commanding barks. Orders to the pack to retreat from this battle they could not win. Whatever advantage they had possessed moments before had evaporated like morning mist in the sun. The hunt had become too costly, too unpredictable, too dangerous. The alpha's instinct for survival, honed by years of life in the wild, overrode its hunger and its pride, and it turned away from the kitten with visible reluctance. The great predator's tail dropped slightly, a sign of submission to a greater force, and it began to trot back toward the cover of the trees. Its wound stung, and its pride was wounded even more deeply, but it knew when a battle was lost. There would be other hunts, other opportunities, other prey, but only if it survived this encounter. The other coyotes followed without hesitation, their powerful legs carrying them swiftly away from the meadow and the fearsome bird that had disrupted their carefully planned attack. They ran in a loose formation, glancing back over their shoulders at the sky, watching to make sure the eagle didn't pursue them further. Within moments, they had disappeared into the shadows of the forest, their presence fading like a nightmare upon waking, leaving only the soft rustling of brush and the fading sound of their paws on the forest floor. The eagle circled once more, making sure the predators were truly gone and would not return, its keen eyes scanning the forest edge for any sign of movement. The great bird's breathing was rapid but controlled, its muscles still tense and ready for action should the coyotes decide to make another appearance. Only when it was absolutely certain of the pack's retreat did the bird begin to relax slightly. The golden eagle descended lower, its massive wings spread wide as it slowed its descent with powerful strokes of air. The great bird landed gracefully on a nearby rock formation, its powerful talons gripping the stone with ease, its golden eyes fixed upon the small, trembling kitten below. The eagle's chest heaved with exertion, and its feathers were slightly ruffled from the intensity of the combat, but otherwise it appeared unharmed by the encounter. For a long moment, there was only silence across the meadow. The wind had died down, and even the insects seemed to have paused in their evening songs. The kitten stared up at the eagle, unable to move, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The small creature's mind reeled with the rapid succession of events, from certain death to unexpected salvation in the span of mere minutes. Had it been saved? Was this new creature about to become a new threat? Would the eagle now see the kitten as a meal, a small morsel to reward itself for its efforts in combat? The kitten's mind struggled to process the rapid shift from certain death at the jaws of the coyote pack to possible danger from this new predator. Fear still gripped its small heart, though now it was tempered with a glimmer of hope and confusion. The eagle tilted its massive head, studying the small creature with an intelligence that seemed almost human in its depth and complexity. Its sharp eyes, capable of seeing details from miles away, took in every aspect of the kitten. The silver-gray fur still matted with sweat and fear, the bright emerald eyes wide with shock and wonder, the small body still trembling from the adrenaline surge of near death. The eagle's gaze was penetrating and thoughtful, as if the great bird was making some kind of judgment or calculation. The eagle made a soft, clicking sound in its throat, almost like a communication or acknowledgement. It was a sound that was neither threatening nor welcoming, simply present, a reminder that the kitten was not alone. The great bird's head turned slightly, and for a moment it seemed as though the eagle and the kitten shared an understanding that transcended the normal boundaries between predator and prey. Then, as mysteriously as it had arrived, the eagle spread its massive wings and took flight once more, pushing off from the rock with powerful leg muscles and beating its wings in a steady rhythm. The great bird climbed higher and higher into the darkening sky, gaining altitude with each stroke, until it was nothing more than a distant silhouette against the fading light of the sunset. The eagle's form grew smaller and smaller, becoming less distinct, until it was barely visible against the darkening clouds. The great bird circled once, twice, then 3 times, as if surveying the meadow below one final time to ensure that the threat had truly passed. Then, with a final, graceful bank of its wings, the eagle headed toward the distant mountains, disappearing into the gathering darkness like a spirit returning to the realm from which it had come. The sound of its wings faded gradually, until there was nothing but silence once more. The kitten remained motionless for several minutes after the eagle had gone, unable to fully comprehend what had transpired. The coyotes were gone, vanished into the forest like ghosts. The eagle was gone, disappeared into the sky like a dream upon waking. And the kitten was still alive, still breathing, still conscious and aware. As the full weight of its survival began to sink in, the kitten realized something profound and life-changing. The world was far more complex and unpredictable than it had ever imagined in its short life. Danger could come from anywhere, striking without warning, threatening to end everything in an instant. But so could salvation, arriving from the most unexpected of sources, appearing when all hope seemed lost. The innocent wanderer had just learned its first and most important lesson about the wild. That survival was never guaranteed, that the rules were written in blood and struggle, and that sometimes, in the most desperate moments when death seemed inevitable, help could come from the most unexpected of sources. The universe was not a simple place of predators and prey, but a complex web of relationships and interactions that defied their easy understanding. But as night fell completely over the meadow, enveloping everything in darkness and shadow, the kitten realized another truth that was equally important. It was now alone in the darkness, far from its mother's den, with no clear path home. The meadow that had seemed so familiar and welcoming in the daylight now felt alien and hostile, filled with unknown dangers and unseen threats. The stars were beginning to appear in the sky above, tiny points of light that offered little comfort to a small creature lost in the vast wilderness. The adventure was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The kitten had survived its first true test, had faced death and lived to tell the tale. But there were many more trials ahead, many more lessons to learn, many more dangers to face. The road home would be long and difficult, and the kitten would need to draw upon reserves of courage and determination that it didn't yet know it possessed. As the darkness deepened and the temperature dropped, the kitten finally found the strength to move. With legs still shaking from fear and adrenaline, it began to walk, not knowing where it was going, guided only by instinct and the faint hope that somehow, some way, it would find its way back to the safety of its mother's den. The kitten's tiny paws pressed against the soft, yielding earth of the meadow as it began to walk with deliberate, measured steps, each movement a conscious effort of sheer will against the overwhelming fatigue and paralyzing fear that threatened to consume it entirely. The darkness had settled over the landscape like a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from shadow and uncertainty, transforming the once familiar meadow into something alien, unknowable, and profoundly hostile. Shadows stretched and twisted in ways that seemed to defy the very laws of logic and geometry, morphing from one shape to another as the kitten's eyes tried desperately to make sense of them. Every rustle of grass or whisper of wind, sounds that would have been comforting during daylight hours, sent fresh waves of anxiety and dread coursing through the kitten's small body, causing its fur to stand on end and its heart to race with renewed panic. The stars above provided some faint, ethereal illumination, scattered points of light that cast a pale, ghostly glow across the landscape like diamonds scattered across black velvet. The moon had not yet risen above the eastern horizon, and the kitten knew with an instinctive understanding that without its guidance and light, finding the way home would become exponentially more difficult, perhaps even impossible. The lunar cycle was something the kitten had never consciously considered before. But now, in the darkness, it seemed vitally important. The small creature paused for a moment, its body trembling not just from cold, but from the weight of uncertainty. It stood motionless in the center of the meadow, trying desperately to orient itself, searching with all its senses for any familiar landmarks, any recognizable scents, or any visual cues that might point it in the direction of its mother's den. The kitten's whiskers twitched as it sampled the air, hoping to catch a scent that would trigger recognition and memory. But the meadow, which had seemed so manageable, so navigable, and so relatively safe during the bright daylight hours, had been completely transformed by the arrival of darkness. It had become a labyrinth of confusion and uncertainty, a place where nothing looked quite right and everything seemed slightly off. The kitten's sense of direction, never particularly strong or reliable to begin with, had been thoroughly scrambled and disoriented by the terror and adrenaline of the past hour, an hour that felt like it had lasted an eternity. The kitten turned slowly in place, completing a full circle as it tried desperately to remember which direction it had come from when it first ventured out into the meadow. But all the paths looked the same in the darkness, indistinguishable from one another, leading nowhere that the kitten could identify, the landmarks that had seemed so clear and obvious in daylight. The distant tree line, the rocky outcropping to the north, the small stream that cut through the eastern edge of the meadow, were either invisible or unrecognizable in the darkness. A sound broke through the night air with sudden, startling clarity. The distant call of an owl, a long, mournful hoot that echoed across the empty landscape like the cry of some ancient spirit. The sound was haunting and beautiful, but to the kitten's traumatized mind, it was deeply unsettling. The kitten froze instantly, its entire body going rigid with fear, every muscle locked tight. Was this another predator? Another threat? Another danger lurking in the darkness, waiting to strike? The kitten's mind, already stretched thin by the trauma of the coyote encounter and pushed to its absolute limits by fear and exhaustion, began to spiral into panic once more. The kitten's breathing became rapid and shallow, and its small heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst from its chest. But the owl did not approach. The sound did not grow closer or more threatening. Instead, it faded gradually into the distance, becoming fainter with each passing moment until it was barely audible. The kitten realized, after several long, agonizing minutes, that the great bird was simply calling out to its mate, engaging in a normal part of the nocturnal symphony of the wild, a ritual as old as time itself. Still, the sound served as a powerful and sobering reminder that the night was far from safe or welcoming, that darkness brought with it a host of dangers and threats that the kitten had never had to consider or worry about before. The world at night was a completely different place from the world of daylight, governed by different rules and inhabited by different creatures with different hunting patterns and behaviors. The kitten forced itself to move forward once more, choosing a direction almost at random, guided more by desperation than by any real sense of orientation, and hoping against hope that instinct, that mysterious inner compass that guided all creatures, would guide it true. Its tiny paws carried it across the meadow, moving away from the site of the coyote attack, toward the distant tree line where the forest began in earnest. The grass brushed against the kitten's fur with each step, still damp with evening dew that had begun to condense as the temperature dropped. The kitten shivered as the moisture seeped into its coat, weighing it down and conducting heat away from the kitten's small body. The kitten's fur, which normally served as excellent insulation, was becoming increasingly less effective as it became wet. The temperature was dropping steadily and noticeably as night deepened and the hours crept forward. And the kitten realized with growing concern and dread that it had never experienced true, penetrating cold before. Its mother's den had always been warm and comfortable, sheltered from the elements by thick stone walls that retained heat and the combined body heat of its siblings pressed close together through the night. Out here, exposed to the open air with nothing to shield it from the elements, the kitten felt vulnerable in ways it had never imagined possible. The cold seemed to seep into the kitten's bones, sapping its strength and making each movement feel sluggish and difficult. The kitten began to shiver uncontrollably, and its teeth chattered despite its efforts to keep them still. As it approached the forest edge, the kitten paused once more, peering into the darkness beneath the trees with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The forest was even darker than the meadow had been, the dense canopy of leaves and branches blocking out what little starlight had been available in the open space. The kitten could hear sounds coming from within the trees, the rustle of small creatures moving through the undergrowth, the snap of twigs under invisible paws, the soft padding of larger animals moving through their nocturnal routines. There were also sounds that the kitten could not identify, mysterious rustlings and creaks and groans that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The forest was alive with activity and sound, a complex ecosystem operating on a schedule that was completely foreign to the kitten's experience. The kitten's instincts screamed at it to turn back, to find some sheltered spot in the meadow and wait for dawn to break, trusting that the arrival of daylight would bring safety and clarity. But the kitten also knew, with a certainty that seemed to come from some deep, primal part of its being, some ancient instinct inherited from countless generations of ancestors, that it needed to find shelter soon. The cold was becoming more intense with each passing minute, and without the warmth of its mother or its siblings, without any external source of heat, the kitten risked succumbing to hypothermia as the night wore on. The kitten's body was already beginning to slow down, its metabolism dropping as it tried to conserve energy and heat. The kitten knew, without understanding how it knew, that staying in the open meadow much longer would be fatal. Taking a deep breath that came out as a small, trembling mew, a sound so quiet and pathetic that it barely disturbed the night air, the kitten steeled itself and stepped into the forest. The darkness beneath the trees was almost complete, a suffocating, oppressive blanket of black that seemed to press down upon the kitten from all sides, crushing and overwhelming. The kitten's eyes, which were adapted for seeing in dim light far better than human eyes, struggled mightily to make sense of the shapes and shadows that surrounded it. The pupils of the kitten's eyes dilated to their maximum extent, trying to capture every available photon of light. But it still wasn't enough to see clearly. Roots twisted across the forest floor like serpents, gnarled and dangerous, threatening to trip the kitten with every step. Branches hung low, catching at the kitten's fur and scratching at its sensitive face and ears. The kitten moved slowly, cautiously, with exaggerated care, testing each step before committing its full weight to ensure that the ground was stable and that there were no hidden obstacles. The forest floor was treacherous and uneven, with sudden dips and rises that the kitten could barely perceive in the darkness. More than once, the kitten stumbled, its paw slipping on loose soil or catching on a hidden root. Each time, the kitten caught itself at the last moment before falling, but each near fall sent fresh spikes of fear and adrenaline through its system. The sounds of the forest seemed to intensify dramatically in the darkness, becoming louder and more threatening with each passing moment. The kitten heard the scratch of claws on bark. A squirrel, perhaps, or a raccoon, moving through the trees above with the confidence of a creature at home in the darkness. The kitten heard the soft chirp of insects, thousands of them, creating a constant background hum. The kitten heard the croak of frogs from somewhere nearby, a sound that suggested the presence of water. The kitten heard the distant howl of a wolf or coyote from far away in the mountains, a sound that made the kitten's blood run cold. That last sound sent fresh terror and panic through the kitten's heart. Were the coyotes following? Had they regrouped and decided to continue their hunt despite the eagle's intervention? Had the pack decided that the kitten was worth the effort and the danger? The kitten's pace quickened involuntarily, desperation overriding caution and reason. The kitten stumbled over a root, nearly falling completely, caught itself at the last moment with a desperate scramble of paws, and continued forward with even greater urgency. The kitten's breathing became rapid and panicked, and its small body trembled with a combination of fear, cold, and exhaustion. After what felt like hours of walking through the darkness, though in reality it was probably only 30 or 40 minutes, the kitten began to notice a subtle change in the forest around it. The trees were becoming more sparse and less densely packed, and the undergrowth was becoming thicker and more tangled. The kitten realized that it had wandered off the main forest paths, the trails that were regularly traveled by deer and other large animals, and into a more remote and isolated area, a place where few creatures ventured. The kitten's legs were beginning to ache from the constant walking and climbing, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that seemed to permeate every fiber of the kitten's small body. The kitten's small body was shaking from cold and exhaustion, and the kitten knew with increasing certainty that it couldn't continue much longer without rest. The kitten's reserves of energy were nearly depleted, and without shelter and warmth, the kitten would soon be unable to continue. The kitten needed to find shelter, somewhere warm and safe, where it could wait out the long night and hopefully survive until dawn. Without such shelter, the kitten's chances of surviving the night were becoming increasingly slim. Then, through the darkness, as if in answer to a prayer that the kitten didn't even know it was making, the kitten spotted something that made its heart leap with sudden, desperate hope. A faint glow of light coming from somewhere ahead, barely visible through the trees and undergrowth. The light was warm and orange, the unmistakable color of fire. The kitten's pace quickened dramatically as it moved toward the light, pushing through the undergrowth with renewed energy and determination. Branches that had seemed so threatening moments before were now simply obstacles to be overcome. The light grew brighter as the kitten approached, becoming more distinct and more real with each step. Soon, the kitten could make out the source of the light with increasing clarity. It was a small cave, nestled into the side of a rocky hillside, and inside, a fire was burning with a steady, reassuring glow. The orange and yellow flames danced and flickered, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. Smoke rose from the fire and drifted out of the cave entrance, carrying with it the scent of burning wood and something else. Something the kitten couldn't quite identify. The kitten stopped at the entrance to the cave, frozen by a complex mixture of confusion, wariness, and desperate need. The warmth radiating from the fire was almost irresistible, a siren song calling to the kitten's desperate need for comfort and safety and relief from the cold. But the presence of the fire also raised urgent questions that the kitten's exhausted mind struggled to process. Who would be out here in the forest at night, maintaining a fire? The kitten's mind raced with possibilities, most of them terrifying. Was this a human? A hunter with a gun? Some other creature that the kitten had never encountered before? Was this a trap of some kind? Was the fire bait designed to lure in unsuspecting animals? But the cold was becoming almost unbearable, seeping into the kitten's very core, and the kitten's exhaustion was reaching critical levels. The kitten's body was beginning to shut down, entering a state of torpor as it tried to conserve energy and heat. The warmth emanating from the fire was almost irresistible, calling to something deep and primal within the kitten's consciousness. The kitten took a tentative step forward, peering into the cave with wide, fearful eyes that reflected the firelight like mirrors. Inside, illuminated by the flickering light of the flames, the kitten could make out a figure, a large, four-legged creature with thick, dark fur that seemed to absorb the firelight. The creature was sitting near the fire, its broad back to the kitten, seemingly unaware of the small newcomer's presence. The kitten's heart began to race once more, but this time it was a different kind of racing, a mixture of fear and curiosity and desperate hope. What was this creature? Was it dangerous? Would it attack the kitten on sight? Or would it tolerate the kitten's presence? The kitten's mind spun with questions and possibilities. The kitten took another step forward, then another, drawn inexorably toward the warmth of the fire, despite the very real danger that the unknown creature might represent. Each step was an act of faith, a decision to trust in the possibility of safety over the certainty of cold and danger. The large creature suddenly shifted its weight, and the kitten froze instantly, every muscle tensed and ready to bolt at the first sign of aggression or threat. The creature's massive shoulders rolled slightly, and its head tilted to one side, but it did not turn to face the kitten. Instead, it simply adjusted its position slightly, as if settling more comfortably near the warmth of the flames, as if the kitten's presence was somehow expected and acceptable. The kitten gathered every ounce of courage it possessed, courage that came from desperation and need, and the primal will to survive, and took another step forward, crossing the threshold of the cave. The warmth hit the kitten like a physical force, a wave of heat that seemed to wrap around the kitten's small body and pull it deeper into the cave. The kitten let out a sigh of relief so profound that it seemed to come from the very depths of the kitten's soul, a sound that expressed all the fear and pain and exhaustion that the kitten had endured over the past hours. For the first time since leaving its mother's den what felt like an eternity ago, the kitten felt something approaching peace and safety. The large creature's ears twitched slightly, acknowledging the kitten's presence with a subtle movement, but it did not turn around to face the newcomer. The creature simply sat there, watching the fire with what seemed to be calm acceptance, as if it had been expecting the kitten all along, as if the small creature's arrival was somehow part of some larger plan. The kitten moved slowly toward the fire, keeping a safe distance from the strange creature, and settled down on the warm stone floor of the cave. The heat from the flames began to seep into the kitten's cold, exhausted body, warming muscles that had become stiff and painful from the cold. The kitten's shivering gradually began to subside as the warmth worked its way through the kitten's small frame. For the first time since the coyote attack, the kitten felt the tension begin to drain from its body. The kitten's breathing slowed and became more regular. The kitten's heart rate, which had been elevated for so long, began to return to something approaching normal. But questions continued to swirl through the kitten's mind like leaves caught in a whirlwind. Who was this creature? Why did it have a fire? Where was the kitten, and how far had it traveled from home? What was the relationship between this creature and the fire? And most importantly, what would happen when morning came? Would the creature turn hostile? Would it see the kitten as food? The kitten's eyes began to grow heavy with exhaustion, the warmth and safety of the cave beginning to have a soporific effect. The kitten watched the dancing flames of the fire, the way they twisted and turned, creating patterns that seemed almost alive. The kitten wondered what new surprises the night and the coming dawn would bring. Outside the cave, the forest continued its nocturnal symphony, oblivious to the small drama unfolding within the stone shelter. Owls called to their mates, insects chirped their songs, and nocturnal creatures went about their business of hunting and surviving. The night was far from over, and there were many more trials yet to come for the lost kitten and its mysterious host. As sleep began to claim the kitten, pulling it down into the depths of exhaustion, the kitten's last conscious thought was a simple one. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow would bring either salvation or new dangers. But for now, in this moment, the kitten was warm, and that was enough. The kitten's eyes fluttered open slowly, consciousness returning gradually like the tide creeping back onto the shore. For a moment, the kitten existed in that liminal space between sleep and wakefulness, unable to fully comprehend where it was or what had happened. The kitten's mind was foggy and confused, filled with fragmented memories of darkness and terror and desperate flight through the night. Then, as awareness returned more fully, the kitten became conscious of several things almost simultaneously. First, there was warmth. Blessed, wonderful warmth that surrounded the kitten like a protective cocoon. Second, there was the smell of smoke and burning wood, a scent that was both unfamiliar and oddly comforting. Third, there was light, not the harsh light of day, but the soft, dancing light of fire, painting the stone walls of the cave in shades of orange and gold. The kitten lifted its head slowly, muscles stiff from sleep and the exertion of the previous day. The kitten's eyes, still heavy with the weight of sleep, focused gradually on the fire that still burned steadily in the center of the cave. The flames had burned down somewhat since the kitten had fallen asleep, but someone, or something, had added fresh wood to keep the fire going through the night. The kitten's gaze traveled from the fire to the large creature that still sat nearby, its massive back still turned to the kitten. In the light of day, for the kitten now realized that morning had indeed arrived, and pale sunlight was streaming into the cave from the entrance. The creature was more clearly visible than it had been in the darkness of night. It was a bear. A large, powerful bear with thick, dark brown fur that seemed almost black in the shadows of the cave. The bear's shoulders were broad and muscular, built for strength and endurance. The bear's head was massive, with a profile that suggested intelligence and awareness. The bear was a creature of considerable size and power, easily one of the most formidable animals the kitten had ever encountered. The kitten's heart rate increased slightly as the reality of the situation sank in. The kitten had spent the entire night sleeping just a few feet away from a bear, one of the most dangerous predators in the entire forest. The bear could have killed the kitten at any moment with a single swipe of its massive paw. The kitten would have been no more than a snack, a tiny morsel barely worth the effort. Yet the bear had not harmed the kitten. Instead, it had allowed the kitten to sleep unmolested, had maintained the fire through the night, and had kept watch as the kitten rested. The bear's behavior suggested something beyond simple indifference. It suggested something that the kitten's mind struggled to comprehend: kindness, compassion, protection. The bear shifted slightly, and the kitten tensed, ready to flee if necessary. But the bear's movements were slow and deliberate, not threatening or aggressive. The bear simply adjusted its position, stretching its massive legs and yawning widely, revealing teeth the size of the kitten's entire head. The yawn was not a threat display, simply the natural movement of a creature waking and stretching after a long night. The bear's ears twitched, and the kitten realized that the bear was listening to something. Perhaps the sounds of the forest outside the cave, or perhaps the kitten's own breathing and heartbeat. The bear's head turned slightly, and for the first time, the kitten caught a glimpse of the bear's profile, the large dark eye that suggested intelligence and awareness. The bear made a low, rumbling sound deep in its chest, not a growl of aggression, but something more like a greeting or acknowledgement. The sound vibrated through the stone floor of the cave and seemed to resonate through the kitten's own body. The kitten's fear began to diminish slightly, replaced by a curious mixture of wonder and cautious hope. The kitten decided, in a moment of either great courage or great foolishness, to attempt communication. The kitten opened its mouth and produced a small, tentative mew, a sound that seemed impossibly fragile and insignificant in the presence of such a large and powerful creature. The bear's entire body went still. The massive creature did not move, did not make any sound. But the kitten could sense that the bear was listening intently, paying full attention to the small creature that had just spoken. The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity, and the kitten began to wonder if it had made a terrible mistake. Then, slowly and carefully, the bear turned its massive head to face the kitten directly. The kitten's breath caught in its throat as it found itself looking directly into the bear's dark eyes. Those eyes were large and intelligent, filled with an awareness and understanding that seemed almost human in its depth. The kitten saw in those eyes something unexpected: sadness, loneliness, a kind of profound melancholy that suggested the bear had experienced great loss and suffering. The bear's gaze held the kitten's for a long moment, and in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended language and species. The kitten sensed that this bear was not a threat, but rather a guardian, a protector, perhaps even a friend. The bear turned its massive head back toward the fire, returning its attention to the flames. The bear made another low, rumbling sound, this one slightly different from the first, less a greeting and more a kind of reassurance. The bear's massive body relaxed, and the kitten understood that the bear was signaling that it was safe, that the kitten could remain in the cave without fear. The kitten, emboldened by this apparent acceptance, began to explore the cave more thoroughly. The cave was larger than the kitten had initially realized, extending back into the hillside for a considerable distance. The walls were rough stone, marked in places with claw marks that suggested the bear had inhabited this cave for a long time. There were bones scattered in one corner, the remains of previous meals, the kitten assumed. Near the back of the cave, the kitten discovered something unexpected. A small stream of water running down the stone wall, collecting in a shallow pool at the base. The water was cold and clear, and the kitten, suddenly aware of a raging thirst, approached the pool cautiously and began to drink. The water was refreshing and revitalizing, and the kitten drank deeply, feeling some of its strength begin to return. After drinking its fill, the kitten returned to the area near the fire, settling down once more on the warm stone floor. The kitten was beginning to feel the first stirrings of hunger, but for now, the warmth and safety of the cave were more important than food. The bear remained motionless for a long time, simply sitting and watching the fire. The kitten watched the bear, studying the massive creature, trying to understand what it was and why it had chosen to help the kitten. The bear's fur was thick and well-maintained, suggesting that the creature was healthy and well-fed. There were scars on the bear's shoulders and flanks, marks that suggested the bear had survived many battles and conflicts. As the morning wore on, the kitten began to feel more comfortable in the bear's presence. The initial fear and wariness began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of trust and gratitude. The kitten realized that the bear had saved its life twice now, once by providing shelter from the cold and darkness of the night, and once by simply allowing the kitten to remain alive in its presence. The kitten's mind began to work on the question of why. Why had the bear done this? What possible reason could the bear have for helping a small, insignificant kitten? The kitten considered several possibilities. Perhaps the bear was simply lonely, seeking companionship even from a creature as small and different as a kitten. Perhaps the bear had lost offspring of its own and saw in the kitten a replacement for that loss. Perhaps the bear was simply kind, possessed of a generous spirit that transcended the normal predator-prey relationships that govern the forest. Whatever the reason, the kitten felt a growing sense of connection to the bear, a bond that went beyond simple gratitude. The kitten sensed that the bear, for all its size and power and danger, was fundamentally lonely. The bear's eyes had revealed that much, and the kitten, despite its own fear and confusion, felt a kind of empathy for the massive creature. As the day progressed, the bear rose to its feet and moved toward the cave entrance. The kitten watched as the massive creature paused at the entrance, silhouetted against the bright sunlight outside. The bear turned its head back to look at the kitten, and in that look, the kitten understood a question. Would the kitten stay, or would it leave? The kitten considered the choice carefully. The kitten could leave the cave and attempt to find its way home. The daylight would make navigation easier, and the kitten's strength had been partially restored by rest and water. The kitten could probably find its way back to its mother's den, though the journey would be long and difficult and filled with dangers. But the kitten also realized something important. The journey home would be difficult and dangerous, and the kitten was not yet strong enough or experienced enough to survive such a journey alone. The forest was filled with predators, and the kitten was still small and vulnerable. Without protection and guidance, the kitten's chances of reaching home safely were minimal. More than that, the kitten realized that it did not want to leave the bear. The kitten had formed a connection with this strange and powerful creature, a connection that went beyond simple self-interest or survival instinct. The kitten wanted to stay, at least for a while longer, to learn from the bear and to understand this remarkable being that had shown the kitten such unexpected kindness. The kitten rose to its feet, stretching its small body, and moved toward the bear. The kitten's movements were cautious but not fearful, and the kitten approached the massive creature with a mixture of respect and trust. The kitten stopped a few feet away from the bear, looking up at the enormous creature with wide, curious eyes. The bear made a low, rumbling sound that the kitten had come to recognize as a kind of approval or acceptance. The bear extended one massive paw forward, and the kitten, in an act of profound trust, moved forward and pressed its small body against the bear's leg. For a moment, neither creature moved. Then, slowly and carefully, the bear lowered its massive head and gently touched the kitten with its nose, a gesture that seemed to contain volumes of meaning. The kitten felt a surge of emotion. gratitude, affection, and a sense of being protected and cared for that was almost overwhelming. The bear turned and walked out of the cave into the bright sunlight of the morning, and the kitten, without hesitation, followed. Outside the cave, the forest stretched out in all directions, green and alive, and filled with possibility. The kitten had no idea where this journey would lead, but for the first time since leaving its mother's den, the kitten felt less afraid. The kitten had found not just shelter and safety, but something far more valuable: a companion, a guardian, perhaps even a friend. And the adventure, the kitten realized, was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning.